Reports were flowing in from every corner of the Reich. Pilots, mechanics, squadron leaders, all describing the same impossible sight. American fighters materializing in places where no American fighter should have been able to fly. Every account defied the known limits of range, fuel, and aerodynamics, and yet each report confirmed the last. Something fundamental was breaking inside the Luftwaffe. Not its aircraft, not its pilots, but its command, blinded by its own certainty. And in the middle of this unraveling stood a single man, Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's inspector of fighters, who understood the truth long before anyone in Berlin was willing to hear it. Intro, call to action brief. On the morning of August 17, 1943. Adolf Galland stood on a railway platform near Rastenburg in East Prussia. Steam drifted across the tracks as Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring prepared to board his luxury train. Just hours earlier, they had finished a high-level conference on fighter operations, and Galland carried intelligence that Germany could not afford to ignore. Reports from across Western Germany described something surreal. American P-38 Lightnings equipped with external drop tanks, operating deep inside the Reich, far beyond the point where American escorts were supposed to turn back. That morning, during the Regensburg raid, Luftwaffe fighters waited at the usual disengagement line. P-47 escorts peeled off just as they always had. The bombers pressed onward. Then out of nowhere more American fighters appeared, not limping, not gliding, not damaged stragglers. Fully armed Lightnings, attacking at altitude 150 miles deeper than physics supposedly allowed. Galland had seen the reports. He had spoken to the pilots. The pattern was undeniable, but Göring rejected the information outright. Impossible, he said. No American fighter can reach that far. And in that moment, on that fog-covered platform, the future of the Luftwaffe snapped. Orders were orders. Facts were optional. Galland watched the train depart, understanding that the air war had entered a phase Germany was utterly unprepared for. 2. A doctrine built on a false assumption for years. Luftwaffe doctrine depended on one core belief. American fighters could not escort bombers deep into Germany. It was an assumption based on mathematics, fuel loads, engine efficiency, the drag of drop tanks, and operational altitude. On paper, it was correct, but wars are not fought on paper. They are fought by engineers, tacticians, and pilots willing to push beyond the limits. America had all three. The introduction of mass-produced external fuel tanks on the P-38 Lightning suddenly expanded the escort envelope, far beyond what German planners predicted, and the Luftwaffe was caught flat-footed. On the very day Göring dismissed Galland's warning, Germany lost more than 24 fighters. Many were downed by the very escort fighters that he insisted did not exist. It was the beginning of an avalanche. 3. Collision with reality. Summer-fall 1943. As August turned to September, the pattern hardened. American bombers now penetrated deep into Germany with intermittent fighter cover. German interception tactics, developed during years when escorts had to retreat early, began collapsing. The most dramatic example came on September 6, 1943, during a raid on Stuttgart. Major Egon Mayer, one of Germany's most feared bomber killers, executed a textbook head-on attack with Jedgeschwader 2, a tactic he personally perfected. They struck the formation cleanly until P-38s dropped from the high-cover position. Behind the bomber stream, 3 German fighters were shot down instantly. More followed moments later. Mayer barely escaped with his life. The Luftwaffe had performed flawlessly. Their doctrine had not. And worst of all, they still didn't understand how deep the escort threat could truly reach. The statistics of collapse. By the autumn of 1943, Galland began compiling loss reports with cold precision. June, 87 fighters lost. July, 106 August, 170 for September, 193 October, 220 for these were not numbers. These were the lifeblood of the fighter force, evaporating month by month. Worse than the aircraft losses were the pilots. Germany had entered 1943 with a cadre of extraordinarily experienced aces, men forged in the skies of France, Britain, Russia, and North Africa. By late 1943, that experience was dying faster than it could be replaced. Pilot training hours were reduced. Fuel shortages cut flight time dramatically. New pilots arrived at the front with barely half the training of Allied flyers. They were fed into battles designed for veterans, and they did not survive long enough to become veterans. Galland called it a death spiral. He was right. 5. December 1st, 1943. A new threat appears. Until this point, the Luftwaffe believed the worst was already happening. They were wrong. On December 1st, 1943, the North American P-51B Mustang entered the European theater. It was the perfect storm of aerodynamic design and high-altitude engineering. A laminar flow wing, a lightweight, streamlined fuselage, and, most importantly, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. With a two-stage supercharger, the Mustang could fight at 30,000 feet. It could turn with German fighters. It could outrun almost anything the Luftwaffe had. And with two drop tanks, it could reach 800 miles. Berlin was 600 miles from England. Suddenly, no target was safe. On December 13, 1943, P-51s escorted B-17s to Kiel to 480 miles from their bases and shot down German fighters without a single loss. Galland's nightmare had arrived. VI Big Week. The final breaking point. By February 1944, American planners were ready for the decisive blow. Operation Argument, later known as Big Week, was not a bombing campaign. It was a calculated, strategic assault designed to break the Luftwaffe in the skies by forcing it into continuous combat. For 6 days, from February 20th to 25th, thousands of American bombers hammered aircraft factories, engine plants, and assembly facilities. But the real objective was simple: destroy Germany's fighter force. Every time German fighters scrambled, they were met by swarms of P-47s, P-38s, and, increasingly, P-51s. The losses were devastating. 260 fighters destroyed, 180 damaged, over 230 pilots killed, wounded, or missing. Among them were some of Germany's most valuable aces, irreplaceable pilots with years of frontline experience. It was the moment Galland had predicted months earlier. But by then, it was too late. The Luftwaffe was collapsing not because its aircraft were poor. Many of them were superb, but because its pilots were gone. The human cost of denial. Wars are won by machines, but they are lost by decisions. And the Luftwaffe's greatest error was not technological or tactical, it was psychological. The refusal of the high command, especially Göring, to acknowledge the changing realities of the air war created a strategic blind spot that no amount of courage or skill could overcome. Experienced pilots were thrown into hopeless missions. New pilots barely understood their own aircraft. Commanders planned operations based on assumptions that had not been true since the summer of 1943. In the end, the Luftwaffe was defeated not by the P-38 or P-47 or even the P-51, but by the belief that these aircraft could not possibly exist where they were already flying. Conclusion: call to action if you want to explore more hidden stories of the air war, the technology, the strategy, and the human decisions that shaped history. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. There are countless stories left to uncover, and we bring them to life every week. The day the Luftwaffe realized it lost the sky. Additional chapters. The training crisis, a force that could not rebuild even before Big Week. The Luftwaffe training system was buckling under pressure, and by early 1944, the cracks had become unfixable. Germany never built a long war aviation pipeline. Its training doctrine was designed for short, decisive campaigns, blitzkrieg in the air, not for a sustained war against the industrial capacity of the United States. During 1940 and 1941, novice German pilots received 200,240 flight hours before combat deployment. They flew in all weather conditions, learned advanced aerobatics, practiced formation flying, and trained in live gunnery. By late 1943, due to fuel shortages and accelerating casualties, training hours fell to as low as 110. Some pilots reported receiving barely 60 hours before being sent into combat. They were now expected to fight opponents with 350,500 training hours. Pilots who had flown long-range escort simulations, formation drills, oxygen mask procedures, engine out practice, and high-altitude maneuvers. It was not a contest of equals. It was a grinder. The Luftwaffe was losing a generation of pilots not just in combat, but in the training fields, where they simply had no chance to prepare. Galland warned repeatedly, "We are sending our boys to their deaths before they can even learn how to fly." His warning fell on deaf ears. The training crisis guaranteed that every German loss was permanent, while every American loss was a temporary setback. IX Technology versus reality. The myth of the Wunderwaffe. By 1943, German propaganda had embraced a new idea. The Wunderwaffe, miracle weapons that would reverse the course of the war. For the Luftwaffe, this miracle was supposed to be the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. On paper, the Me-262 could outrun, outclimb, and outperform every American aircraft in the sky. It was a technological masterpiece, a quantum leap forward in aviation. But technology without strategy means nothing. The jet's engines were fragile, its production delayed by bureaucratic arguments, and its deployment crippled when Hitler insisted it be used as a bomber, not a fighter. By the time the Me-262 reached operational units in significant numbers, the Luftwaffe had already lost the core group of experienced pilots who might have mastered it. Germany had created the world's most advanced fighter, but had no one left to fly it. The Mustang dominates. Strategy perfected. The P-51 Mustang was not simply a better aircraft. It was part of a perfectly designed system. American industrial power meant endless production of spare parts, constant availability of new aircraft, standardized training, mass production of drop tanks, long-range radio coordination, aerial refueling practices, and development. But the true advantage lay tactic evolution. By early 1944, escort fighters no longer stayed tied to the bomber formation. They were now instructed to find the Luftwaffe, hunt the Luftwaffe, destroy the Luftwaffe. It was a total shift in mentality. Instead of protecting bombers reactively, Mustang groups went on the offensive, sweeping ahead of the bomber stream, diving down on forming German squadrons, attacking airfields. During takeoff, hunting for stragglers, cutting off retreat paths. The bombers were no longer the bait. The Luftwaffe was. By March 1944, German pilots reported the sky filled with Mustangs. They climbed higher, stayed longer, and struck with precision. Aces with 50, 60, 100 kills, legends of the Luftwaffe, were being picked off by young, aggressive American pilots who had never known defeat in the air. The psychological shift was complete. XI Fighter Group 4, a case study in American adaptation to understand how quickly American units learn. We can look at the 4th Fighter Group, originally composed of volunteer pilots who had flown with the RAF before America entered the war. By early 1944, the group transitioned entirely to P-51 Mustangs. Their kill ratios skyrocketed. During one mission in March, the group destroyed 29 German fighters, damaged 24 more, and lost only 4 aircraft. These numbers were not anomalies. They became routine. The 357th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Oxford Boys, achieved similar results. In April 1944, they shot down over 50 German fighters in a single day. These victories were not luck. They represented a new era, an air force built around range, teamwork, universal training standards, and overwhelming numbers. Germany's technological excellence could not compensate for strategic reality. The collapse of air superiority. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe could no longer control the skies over its own territory. Fewer and fewer experienced pilots remained. Fuel shortages prevented regular flight training. Airfields were bombed daily. Maintenance crews were understaffed. Spare parts were scarce. And every engagement brought new losses. Even the once feared FW-190 and Bf-109 became symbols of a bygone era. Brilliant designs overshadowed by overwhelming attrition. The Mustang did not simply defeat the Luftwaffe in dogfights. It defeated the entire German aviation ecosystem. Fighter training, logistics, industry, strategic planning, morale, pilot survivability, operational doctrine. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe still existed on paper. In reality, it was a fractured remnant, a force that could no longer influence the war. Galland's final report. The point of no return. Late in 1944, Galland prepared one of his most significant documents, a comprehensive analysis of the fighter force collapse. In it, he wrote, "We no longer fight for victory, but to delay defeat." The report outlined the fundamental issues. Pilot losses outweighed training capacity, technical innovation came to late fuel shortages. Crippled operations, American escort fighters controlled the operational tempo, command level denial prevented early reforms. Galland concluded that the Luftwaffe had passed the point of no return in late 1943. Exactly when Göring dismissed his initial warnings. His prophecy had come true. Chief Epilogue. The cost of ignoring reality. The story of the Luftwaffe's defeat is not simply about planes or tactics. It is about leadership and the devastating consequences of strategic denial. American fighters did not magically appear deep in Germany. Their arrival was the product of engineering, logistics, innovation, and a willingness to adapt. The Luftwaffe failed not because its pilots lacked skill. Many were extraordinary, but because its leadership refused to see what was happening until it was too late. The reports that seemed impossible were true. The escorts that could not exist were real, and the sky over Germany. Many people don't realize that at the beginning of the war, the Luftwaffe was the most technically advanced air force in the world. Every German fighter had a radio, which was extremely rare in 1939, giving them unmatched coordination. But the same air force that dominated Poland and France later collapsed because it couldn't replace its pilots fast enough. Early war pilots trained for more than 200 flying hours. By 1944, some rookies entered combat with barely 60 hours of total flight time, and many died within their first week. The Bf-109, the Luftwaffe's main fighter, climbed faster than most Allied aircraft, but its range was shockingly small. German pilots crossing the English Channel often had just minutes of combat time before fuel forced them to return. This short range is one reason Germany never achieved complete air dominance over Britain. Despite its weaknesses, the Luftwaffe produced the world's first operational jet fighter, the Me-262. It could outrun every Allied aircraft by a huge margin, but the engines were unreliable, lasted only a few dozen hours, and production was constantly disrupted by bombings. Worse, Hitler insisted it be used as a bomber for months, delaying its deployment as a fighter when it could have mattered most. A devastating problem for Germany was not enemy fighters, but fuel. By late 1943, many Luftwaffe training units had no aviation fuel at all for weeks. Some pilots practiced only taxiing on the ground. Meanwhile, American fighter pilots trained up to 500 hours before seeing combat. The skill gap became so large that German aces wrote in diaries that fighting Mustangs felt like fighting an enemy who controlled the sky itself. When the P-51 Mustang finally appeared over Germany, everything changed. It combined high-altitude performance, long range, and maneuverability. For the first time, American fighters could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. German pilots reported that Mustangs could appear from above, behind, or from the sun, and disappear just as quickly. Luftwaffe veterans said the psychological shock of the Mustang was as destructive as its guns. American industry provided a different kind of power. The United States produced more than 300,000 aircraft during the war. Factories built one new airplane roughly every 5 minutes. While Germany struggled to replace wrecked fighters, the U.S. could replace entire groups in a single month. Even maintenance was on another level. American ground crews could change a B-17 engine in 3 hours, repair damaged aircraft overnight, and keep whole squadrons in constant rotation. The P-38 Lightning, with its twin engines and long range, was the preferred aircraft for interception missions in the Pacific. It was the fighter used to shoot down Admiral Yamamoto's aircraft, one of the most precisely executed aerial interceptions in history. Meanwhile, the P-47 Thunderbolt became famous for its toughness. Pilots told stories of Thunderbolts returning with cylinders blown off, wings shot through, or entire control surfaces missing. One of the most shocking truths of the air war is that by 1940, Germany still had many aircraft on paper, but could not fly them. There was no fuel, spare parts were missing, and thousands of aircraft sat idle while the Allies achieved total air superiority. Many Luftwaffe bases were full handful of planes that never left the ground again. By the end of the war, the average German pilot lived only a handful of missions. The average American pilot lived long enough to become a veteran. The difference was not just aircraft quality. It was training, logistics, fuel, radar networks, and a level of industrial output the world had never seen before. Even German commanders admitted after the war that the Luftwaffe did not lose because of poor aircraft design. It lost because it ran out of time, out of fuel, and out of men capable of flying its machines. By the middle of the war, German aircraft production looked strong on paper, yet the reality was very different. Factories could build planes, but they couldn't deliver them to combat units fast enough. Allied bombing raids targeted not only the factories themselves, but the transportation network around them. Trains carrying engines, wings, or fuel were destroyed before reaching frontline squadrons, even when a brand new Bf 109 rolled out of the production line. It could sit for weeks waiting for fuel, a trained pilot, or a safe airfield to operate from. German pilots frequently described the exhaustion of fighting multiple sorties per day. Some aces flew 7 or 8 missions in a single morning, constantly scrambling to intercept incoming bomber streams. These were not short dogfights, they were long, draining engagements against waves of well-defended aircraft. The stress levels were so high that Luftwaffe doctors wrote medical reports about combat burnout, a condition similar to what we would now call PTSD. Many pilots were physically capable, but mentally at the breaking point. The American airmen faced a different challenge: the sheer scale of operations. A typical bomber raid involved 600 to 1,000 aircraft, all requiring coordination, altitude separation, rendezvous points, and complex timing. American flight engineers created entire tactical handbooks, explaining how to form giant bomber boxes, how to maintain defensive fire coverage, and how to rotate positions within the formation to spread the risk evenly across crews. The discipline needed to maintain such formations under enemy attack was extraordinary. Another overlooked aspect of the American advantage was radar integration. Long-range radar networks along the British coast allowed controllers to track Luftwaffe aircraft the moment they took off. Fighter groups on alert could be airborne and climbing before German pilots reached cruising altitude. This early warning system meant that Germany rarely achieved surprise after 1943. Every interception became more dangerous because American fighters were already waiting at altitude. German aircraft, while technically impressive, suffered from poor cockpit ergonomics compared to American designs. The Bf 109 had a cramped cockpit with limited visibility and a narrow landing gear, which caused accidents even among experienced pilots. The P-51 Mustang, on the other hand, offered wide visibility, a comfortable cockpit, and hydraulic controls that reduced pilot fatigue. These differences mattered in long missions, where endurance and attention were crucial for survival. Weather also played a much bigger role than people realize. The Luftwaffe depended on clear skies for visual interceptions, but American bombers and escorts gradually adapted to flying in poor weather, using improved instruments and navigation systems. This allowed the U.S. to keep pressure on German industry even during the winter months, when historically air operations slowed down. Germany found itself fighting not just the enemy but the seasons. German engineers created some extraordinary weapons late in the war. Advanced radar, guided air-to-air missiles, even the world's first operational jet bomber. But these innovations arrived when the Luftwaffe's pilot corps was already devastated. A high-tech aircraft in the hands of an under-trained pilot was no match for a well-trained American flying a Mustang or Thunderbolt. Technology can win battles, but only if the people operating it are prepared. Many American pilots who flew escort missions later said the most shocking moment was seeing how empty the sky became in 1945. Early in the war, Germany could field hundreds of fighters for a major interception. By spring 1945, a bomber group might encounter only a handful of German aircraft, or sometimes none at all. The Luftwaffe had not been defeated, it had been worn down to the point of disappearance.